Yesterday, California State Auditor Elaine Howell released a requested audit of California's high-speed rail authority, and the project that we know colloquially as the Bullet Train would be the first in the nation to do high-speed transit between two major cities, Los Angeles and San Francisco. The report is full of highly critical analysis of the high-speed rail project. It cites flawed decision-making regarding the start of construction in the Central Valley. It remarks on ongoing poor contract management for a wide range of high-value contracts. They say that's led to billions of dollars in cost overruns toward completing the system. And it also, quite damningly, cited the fact that the High-Speed Rail Authority knew that there was tremendous risk in starting construction without acquiring the land, without understanding what the cost would be to relocate utility systems, and that all the negotiations with external stakeholders had not been concluded. Additionally, it found that the public was not informed that the High-Speed Rail Authority knew the degree of risk it was undertaking to start early in an attempt to secure federal government funding before the clock ran out. This all disclosed in the release yesterday of the high-speed rail audit conducted by the state auditor. And I'll just read you this line. This is written by the auditor. Despite being aware of these risks, the authority did not account for them in its project cost estimates until this year, meaning that they knew this for years, but did not inform the public. Joining us, Los Angeles Times national correspondent who's closely followed the high-speed rail project, Ralph Vartabedian. Ralph, good to have you with us again. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Larry. It's great to be on the air with you again.
Share with us, just stepping back a moment, the genesis of this. Was this a legislative request that the auditor take this on?
Yeah, the request was made earlier this year after other attempts or requests were made for, at least the last 3 years. The last time the auditor took a close look at this was, I believe it was 6 years ago. So while these problems have been mounting, a lot of the critics have sought this audit. There hasn't been an agreement until this year when the costs really began to spike, and it was clear that things were not, well, it was clear that things weren't going well some time ago, but it became compelling to do the audit this year.
And it cites the federal government's granting process, that the grant deadline extension has been pushed back to December of 2022. But in Elaine Howell's audit, she says, unless Central Valley construction progresses twice as fast as it has to date, the state could be at risk of having to pay back as much as $3.5 billion in federal funds. And it also points out in the audit that all of the savings that could be expected from sharing existing rail infrastructure have now been realized, and that has helped mitigate the costs here, but there's not an opportunity moving forward to find similar cost mitigation. Ralph, what's your sense of how this is being received in the legislature?
Well, we haven't got much feedback from the legislature. The Republicans clearly have jumped on this. They've opposed the project, at least in some form or another, for quite some time, and they're obviously concerned about it. We don't know yet what the Democrats will do about this. Particularly, they're probably waiting to see what the new governor, Gavin Newsom, is going to do when he comes into office in January.
And that seems a bit unclear. Has anyone really been able to pin him down as to if he has a threshold for backing away from the project or not?
Not really. in a few remarks that he made recently to our columnist George Skeleton in Sacramento, he said that he wanted to curtail it, but outlined some plans that seemed fairly similar to what the existing plan is now, which is to complete the Central Valley, connect it to the Bay Area, and then operate a partial segment to prove that it's financially profitable, and then secure additional funding for the Southern Link.
We reached out to the High-Speed Rail Authority to have a representative join us. They declined our request to be part of the conversation. Democratic State Senator Jim Beal responded saying the high-speed rail project is crucial to California's economic future. It will transform our transportation system, reduce greenhouse emissions, and ease commutes to job centers such as Silicon Valley. As with any big infrastructure project, there are challenges. The State Auditor's report provides sound recommendations that we can apply to increase efficiencies, not only for high-speed rail, but other major state construction projects. I look forward to working on them. That's Democratic State Senator Jim Beal, supporter of the high-speed rail project. Also joining us in conversation is James Moore, USC, professor of industrial systems and civil engineering. He directs the transportation engineering program at SC. Professor Moore, good to have you with us again.
Always a pleasure.
What stands out to you most about the auditor's report?
Quite a bit. I am struck by how much attention is given to really what is project management 101. So I shouldn't be surprised at this point, given some of the decisions that have been made, but I can't help but be disappointed at the authority's inability to get the basics right. So much of the auditor's report is really very routine stuff, saying this is not how you're supposed to proceed when you manage a project. Here are standard steps you could take to actually quit squandering money. And the larger questions are there too, but they don't get quite as much space on the page. This point that the authority began construction before it was by any stretch of the imagination ready, and what that meant, and whether or not the authority understood what it was doing. I'm glad to see that question getting attention, but it's a long-standing question at this point. I mean, the authority jumped into this project really, I think, for cynical political reasons. They wanted to get the spade in the ground. They wanted to get some pieces of infrastructure out there and visible for really, I think, the most cynical purposes. They knew that once we began building the project, there were going to be participants, players in the process, who would be terrified at the prospect of stopping, because nobody wants to build the bridge to nowhere. Nobody wants a piece of obsolete, unused infrastructure that clearly documents government waste in a very visible way that the media can keep using every time it publishes a story about government waste. And so there would be a very strong incentive for people to hide their mistakes. And if you complete a system with a massive cost overrun, ultimately that's largely invisible to the public. If you fail to complete a system and you've got unfinished infrastructure sitting there staring at them, that really promotes a desire for accountability on the part of electorate, and on the part of the electorate. And really, I think that was the entire scheme here.
There is risk, though, isn't there? Even if it's finished, and I understand that might not happen, but if the high-speed rail project is completed, because of these cost mitigation using existing freight in some areas, passenger in other areas, if speeds have to be significantly reduced, or trains end up stopped part of the way to allow freight to go, or whatever accommodations have to be made, won't that also leave the project open to ridicule?
I would argue that if for risk to exist, there has to be at least two possibilities to be considered. There's no possibility of the project being a success even if it is completed. So the risk, given the fact that it can't succeed, it cannot operate without a subsidy, which under law it must. It cannot deliver the technical performance that was called out in Prop 1A. Even without the blended segments, it can't operate in the fashion that was described to the voters when they were asked to approve the bond measure.
All right, Professor, I need to wrap, but I thank you for being with us. That's James Moore at USC. He directs the Transportation Engineering Program, professor at USC. And our thanks to LA Times national correspondent who's been covering high-speed rail very closely, Ralph Vartabedian.